In this video, I'm going to share a study with you of exporting and importing scenes from your 3D modeling package, in my case Maya, into Unreal Engine 5. This is a great workflow for when you want to just focus on creating and modeling inside your 3D modeling package, and you have a large scene already constructed, but you don't want to have to reconstruct it inside Unreal Engine 5, such as creating modular meshes. You just simply want to bring in everything you have and everything that's perfectly already created and positioned into Unreal and just slide it and render it. And this will give you a few ideas of how you may want to approach this. Some downsides, some upsides, things that happen along the way, and just maybe give you a way to do something that you may not have realized you could. So let's get started. So here in Maya, I have a scene constructed and I was creating an environment that eventually I wanted to take into UE5. But I didn't want to actually create all these separate pieces and have to construct them inside Unreal Engine. I basically wanted to see how the scene would look in Maya, so I actually duplicated all the meshes, snapped them together, have all the pieces here, and I want to go ahead and take this scene, take this entire environment with all the meshes, and bring it over into UE5. I don't want to have to export each individual piece and then have to put it together all over again inside Unreal Engine. I basically want to use Unreal Engine as a way to light and maybe render and create maybe perhaps a cinematic or something like that. And I really don't want to use it to reconstruct this all over again. So what I could do is just simply take all of these meshes that I created, duplicated and repositioned, and export them all together and then bring them into UE5. So there are a couple of ways you can do so. The first and easiest way is just you would select all your meshes and then you would export your selection. So let's go ahead and do that now. I would go to File, Export Selection, and you just choose a folder where you want to export. And the most important part is I am going to export all of my scenes and all these tests as an FBX export. So I already have a folder that I'm going to export into. It's a little test folder that I created. And the properties that I set up for all of the meshes that I export is on the geometry. You make sure you have smoothing groups enabled, as well as smooth mesh. So these are the two most important options you need to enable for exporting all your static meshes. There are a couple of other ones, but usually you don't touch them until you need them. But those are a little bit more advanced, specifically tangent and binormals. But these are the two that you want to always have enabled. So let's go ahead and name it. And I'm going to export this scene as an FBX file. Now, one thing I want to point out is all of these meshes that I'm going to export are separate. So I'm going to select them all and export them. Let's go back to File, Export Selection, and let's export as, let's say, environment underscore uncombined. Just something that we can recognize because we'll be doing quite a few exports and quite a few tests. Then let's go ahead and export selection. And let's go into UE5 and let's see what kind of options we have to deal with when we import all of these meshes together. In UE5, I already have a project started and launched, and let's go ahead and bring that mesh in. So I have a folder tests, and I'm going to create another subfolder, and I'm going to import everything into that folder so I can keep everything organized, because I'll end up having a lot of meshes when I use the uncombined or I keep them separate. So let's do environment test. Doesn't really matter what the name is. So let's go in here, and the easiest way to import things into Unreal is just find your FBX file and then left click and drag and drop it right into the content browser, into that folder. Now, a few important options to point out. The first one on import, you have generate misaligned collisions. So if you need collisions for your mesh, keep that on. If it's not going to be playable and you're not going to be dealing with some kind of player collisions that the environment will have to be walkable by a character, then you can disable this. Another one is ability for you to create a new material and automatically assign to the meshes that you import. So you actually want to keep this on. It's a really quick and easy way for Unreal to create a simple material with one flat color applied into the base color and just apply it to all the static meshes automatically. Otherwise, you would have to do this all yourself by creating it and then applying it. So it may take a little bit of time, and that's just a quick way to do so right off the bat. So I'll keep this on. Another option is generate light map UVs. So if you're going to bake your environments with static lighting and you do not have light map UVs already on your objects, you then create a second UV channel. You may want to keep this on. Basically, Unreal will take your existing UVs from the first default texturing channel, duplicate them over to another channel, and we'll use that channel as your light map channel. But this is only for static lighting. If you're going to use the new lumen system, the lighting system in UE5, that's all dynamic and you don't actually need any light maps. And then the last option, and this one we're going to take a look at in the second example, is combined meshes. So I'm going to keep this disabled. That means that all of my meshes from Maya will be brought in as separate static meshes. And you will see in just a minute when I hit import all, I'll have a bunch of those single static meshes, individual pieces of geometry from Maya brought in as separate. So let's go ahead and hit import all and just wait. And here are all of my exported static meshes. And there's a total of 60 of them, including the material Lambert 1, which was the default material that was applied in Maya. That was the name of the material itself. And so Unreal keeps the same name of the material. And then that material is applied to every single one of these static meshes. So the benefit of not combining things is you now have all of the pieces that you exported from Maya as individual static meshes. So in order for me to use these, you can just grab all of the static meshes all at the same time, minus the material, and then left click, hold and drag them all together into the level. And your environment that you constructed in Maya will appear in Unreal, because the pivot point for all static meshes gets automatically reset to the world origin while the meshes are still in their position. So when you use it in Unreal, it basically reconstructs your entire scene using that pivot point that got kind of modified that we upon export of FBX. So now if I drag these up, just place it. Here's my same environment exactly in the same place, in the same position and construction as it is in Maya. So this is kind of cool because now I have individual meshes. They're all separate. They all contain their own separate set of UVs, and I can still modify some of these pieces and move them around. Now the only downside about this method is the pivot point is always going to be reset in the world origin as it was in Maya. So some of these pieces, like if I select for example this piece of stair right here, this last one, the pivot point is right there. That was the world origin in Maya. So even though the mesh is here, my pivot point is over there. And this will be applicable to every single mesh. So this is not something you want to actually do if you are going to construct this environment further in Unreal Engine 4, in Unreal Engine 5. But it's more about just taking the existing environment that you constructed in Maya and then having it appear exactly in Unreal Engine 5. Now there is a way for you to modify each individual pivot point on the meshes and then just change it to something else, to another part of your geometry. And I have a video about this. I'll link it in the description, or it'll be within the blog post. But if you're going to modify the pivot point on all these meshes, you might as well actually do the modular set to where you only create individual pieces and then you construct this environment in Unreal Engine. So it doesn't really make sense at this point to spend all this time to modify the pivot point. So you would just use a different workflow for that. Now that you have that same environment in Unreal Engine, what if you want to come back to Maya and modify a few pieces? Well, you can, because the names will be remembered from Maya, and then when you re-import the same meshes into UE5, those meshes will update. So for as long as you don't change the names of the meshes inside Maya, then they will be re-imported and repositioned. So for example, if I just take this wall, for example, just move it back. So these are the same meshes that I have exactly in Unreal Engine 5, and I'll just move this one just to show you what will happen. And now let's say we add a few more pieces. So I duplicate this one, and let's just, maybe I want to extend the wall, and let's do it one more time right here. So basically I continue to construct the environment. And now let's say this is my new set, and I want to go ahead and update it inside Unreal Engine. So I can go ahead and do the same selection. I would select it all, and let's go to File, Export Selection. And I would just update it and replace my environment I combined. Same options. We're going to continue using the same options, and I'm going to override it. Then to re-import, I could select all of these again and then right click on them and then hit re-import. However, I do have two brand new meshes that I added, so those will not be imported. So what I can do is I can re-import a different way, and then bring in the meshes that were added on top. So I go back to my folder, take that same FBX, and I will just drag it into my content browser. So at the moment I have 60 items, so it will add 2 more, and I should have 62. All the options are going to be kept the same, so because I don't want to change it, because I'm updating. So let's hit import all, and it should add 2 items on top. Here we go, 62. And you can see the ones that we modified and moved, they were updated inside the scene. However, since I already dragged all these meshes into my scene to construct the environment, I don't have those extra 2. Now I would have to go find the ones that I'm not using and redrag them in here. However, I don't want to do this because I'd have to position them. And again, this is one of the downsides, that if you have to constantly update and you add new things, then it adds a little bit of work. So you might want to make sure you finish the environment in Maya and then you drag all in, so then you can just focus on lighting. So to deal with this, I will actually delete everything from my level, the one that I placed, and then I will redrag everything. This takes a little bit of just kind of knowing what you're doing. So because I named all these meshes one specific name, they do show up as one single name with just an extension for it. So I know exactly what I would be selecting. So I would go to the outliner, and let's select all of these, and I would delete them. So I delete them all, and then I would reselect them all again, every single one, with the exception of the Lambert, and then just redrag them. And then it would add those 2 that we added in Maya. And let's reposition it back up. So if you are going to go back and forth like this with adding new meshes and then having to re-import, you might want to take all these right here in the outliner and maybe group them into their own folder. So that way you can actually be able to select them a little quicker, and they're not just floating pieces of geometry in the outliner, and it's a little bit more organized. But I also recommend just make sure you nail that seed down in Maya first and then import it, so that way you don't have to deal with that. But it is a way to actually work like this, because now once you are done, I can come in here and just again focus on lighting. So sometimes what happens is you are very quick inside your 3D modeling software and you're constructing your scene. And this is a great workflow for that, because you can just focus on constructing, duplicating meshes. You like how it looks in Maya, and you just want to bring your meshes into Unreal, the entire scene, and just slide it and just make it look good. And then you don't have to reconstruct this entire thing in Unreal all over again. Also, another little side note, I only had one single material applied to every single mesh. So if you have, and you would have different materials for certain meshes, you know, I have the same wall being duplicated, so obviously that would be the same material. But for example, this wall would be another material. The stairs would be another material, another texture. This would be another material. So they would all kind of change based on the static mesh, on the type of static mesh that I'm using. So in Maya, you would actually assign a different material form, and then you would do this first before you bring them over into Unreal Engine 5. So you would assign a different material, you would create, going through Hypershade, you might have to create multiple Lamberts, and you don't have to hook up any textures to it. You just simply create a single standalone Lambert 1, 2, 3, maybe rename it, so those names get carried over into Unreal, and then that will be automatically assigned. So actually, let's go ahead and do that. Let's just select a set of walls right here. Let me go ahead and deselect the slate, and let's just say all these right here will have one material, and let's say that's a Lambert 1, and let's say for the stairs I will do a Lambert 2. And let me go ahead and zoom in and maybe get rid of these. Again, I want to do this quick just to show you. Let's assign a new material. So I'm going to right click on the meshes, and it's going to be a little off screen, so let me move up, right click, and go all the way down, assign new material, and I just want to do a Lambert. So Maya Lambert, and let's go ahead and rename this. And it looks like I did not select the correct one. Let me go ahead and reassign. So it looks like I missed one. So let's select them again. So only the stairs should be selected, and let's assign already an existing one, which is now assigned existing material. It's going to be Lambert 3, but I want to go ahead and rename this, and it gets assigned to the wall, so again, doesn't matter. And I'm going to rename this, let's do MAT stairs. And then let's say one more, let's say this, the main focal point is the wall. I'm gonna do another existing, new material. This is gonna be another Lambert, Maya, Lambert. And this is gonna be MAT underscore wall, or wall window, whatever. And then that would be just Lambert 1. So, but I would rename it, of course, so everything has its own name and has its own extension. And now, let's go ahead and export this. I'm gonna select it all again. Let's go to File, Export Selection. I'm gonna overwrite the existing file. Back in Unreal, I'm gonna select everything, I'm gonna delete it, and I'm gonna re-import it. So that way everything gets brought in as new. Let's go ahead and select it all, delete. And then I want to delete everything in here in this folder, so I'm going to select it. And the way I'm selecting all these right here without marquee dragging or trying to select one by one is you simply select the first item or the last item in the stack in the list. Scroll up, hold Shift, select the first or the last, and it'll select everything in between. And then I'm going to hit delete. And I'm going to force delete it. So they're all gone. Now it's empty, and I'm going to re-import that file again. Let's drag it. And I'm going to use the same options. I'm not going to combine it just yet. Let's go ahead and import all. And now if I go ahead and scroll down to the bottom, I now have MAT wall, MAT stairs, and then Lambert. It's really nice. And then if you ever wanted to eventually edit your materials, you would just double click on that, open up the material editor, and just deal with the material editor itself, and it will be automatically applied. Whatever textures you bring in, whatever else you do here. And all it does is when it imports a material, it just has a constant 3 parameter with a kind of a gray color, a medium gray applied into it. And then just take all these meshes and just redrag them into the world, thus construct a new environment. And let's just drag it up, and here it is again. And let me do another option. And this time I'm going to combine all the meshes into one. You can do this option inside Maya by selecting all of your meshes. And I don't want to select any cameras or any lights or anything like that, just the static geometry. And then I would go to modify. Actually, I'm going to go to mesh and combine. This becomes one single mesh. And then you can export this. And of course, when you import it, Maya recognizes this as one single mesh. It's not going to split anything up because now you've combined it. You're forced to combine this into one. So you no longer will have different pieces. You will just have one single large mesh. Of course, the downside of this method, doing it in Maya or even in Unreal Engine 5 with that combine meshes option, is all of your UVs, your UV editor, now all those meshes, if they were UV'd, now share exact same UV space. So they're basically compressed, combined all into one, and now are sitting on top of each other. Of course, that's not what you want to do. But just to show you, just to run through our study, let's go and export this. Let's do export selection. And I'm going to export this as combined. And let's export selection. Let's go to Unreal Engine 5. And again, I'm going to go ahead and select it, delete it. And I'm going to delete everything here. Again, so I don't have anything. We are nice and clean on the content browser. And I'm just going to drag that mesh, environment combined, into here. I'm going to keep the same options and click import all. It says import all, but I only have one mesh. So it's not like it's going to import separate meshes. It's just you always have two options here. Import all just simply uses the same settings for every single mesh imported. So it's just like one click instead of going through one by one if you ever need to change them. So it doesn't really matter what I press here. Give it a minute and I have now one single mesh. Now the same problem will appear here if I double click to go to static mesh editor. My UVs are all going to be just a mess. Now if I'm using one single texture, for example, for everything, that may probably work if it's a tileable texture, but usually that's not what you want. And you can actually check your UVs here by clicking in the drop down menu right here, and then take a look at channel 0, which is your texturing channel, and channel 1 is your light map channel. Also note that because I had different materials that we applied to various static meshes, I have 3 materials imported. So this static mesh at the moment has 3 material slots. So actually, some of them do have their own unique UV space because I'm using 3 materials. I didn't do this to all the meshes, but this is a workaround that if you do combine them, you should assign a separate material to the ones that you want to share the same material onto. And that way you can actually just swap the materials and those materials will show up. So it actually kind of worked out for us, because if we only had a Lambert or a single one, there's no way I would be able to separate it. But because I had 3 different materials assigned to various meshes, it now created 3 different material slots inside our either the details panel right here. We have material slots that we can actually assign, and those materials will show up on those meshes for specific materials that we have. So if I drag or I change this material wall, it will only apply to that rounded wall inside. So that actually is a nice workaround if you want to keep that one combined mesh and not have to deal with separate meshes. And you also have those slots right here inside the static mesh editor. You open this up, you have 3 different material slots. Now let me go ahead and delete this again and delete all of these 3. Let's go back to Maya. I'm going to go ahead and undo till I get my separate meshes back. And I'm going to select them all and I'm going to export them as not combined in Maya. But I will combine them by checking the little box on import in Unreal Engine 5. So let's go ahead and export this. Export selection. I'm just going to overwrite over that file, environment combined, just replace it. And let's bring in that same mesh into UE5. So if I go ahead and import all right now, it will be all separate meshes. But if I enable combine meshes, this will force it and combine the same way it did in Maya, but we'll do it on import in UE5. So if I go ahead and import all or import, I will now have one individual mesh. I will still to continue have 3 materials because that's what I had in Maya. And now here's my single mesh. And this is a really actually great way, for example, that as long as you do your materials properly, so that way you can have your own UVs for single meshes that you want to have their own separate textures for and separate materials. Now you're dealing with one single mesh. The light maps on it though will not be separated. That's one, but again, if you're not using static lighting, that does not matter. But that way you can just export from Maya and just continue to re-import by now right-clicking on it, and it will update everything on it, including any meshes that you may duplicate and add to, or remove or update. It will always kind of refresh with new stuff. So just to show you, let's come back and let's say I want to remove these and then maybe just kind of bring these back. Just let me snap this back right here, snap that one back, select it all, and then export selection again. I'm going to overwrite this combined mesh back in Unreal, right click, hit re-import. It's going to take a little bit of time. It's going to remember the settings for it, so it's always going to be combined. And now the mesh has been updated. And now I have that same environment, and I can now focus on lighting it and do whatever I need to do with it to make it look good. And last part about this workflow is you have 2 options of exporting meshes. I prefer to select what I need to export and then go to File and choose Export Selection. However, you do have an option go into File and Export All. This means that the entire scene will be exported and everything within it. This may not be the great option to use because if you happen to have any other meshes, whether they are hidden or not, everything will be exported. So I have a few meshes right here, and let me take a look. Yeah, here we are. They are hidden within a layer. It doesn't matter. Everything will be exported and everything will be imported. So you can use this if all you have inside the scene is exactly what you want to export. You can go to File and Export All. However, the best and more specific option with more control is just select what you need to export. You just have to make sure you select it all and then export selection instead. So just 2 options, just be aware of them. So again, this is a great option to use whether you want to combine the meshes upon import or keep them separate. It just allows you to focus on creating your entire environment, modeling and staying in your modeling software most of the time, because you might be way quicker in it than having to reconstruct things back in Unreal, and that usually takes a little bit of time. especially if you have to create a modular set and then construct it. So there are upsides and downsides, but I like this because I can just create this environment, not have to worry about reconstructing it in Unreal, and I can just focus on lighting and rendering in Unreal, but focus on constructing it and creating it in Maya or your 3D modeling package.